At the end of the hallway, there was a door that was never fully closed. Not wide open, not locked, just slightly open, as if someone had pushed it once and then changed their mind. During the day, Lena barely noticed it. Morning light moved across the walls, the kettle boiled, the building outside her apartment made its usual tired sounds, and life arranged itself into manageable pieces. The door was only one more detail in a place full of them. An old apartment, narrow hall, uneven floors, windows that let in more wind than they were meant to. But at night, the door changed. Or perhaps it was not the door that changed. Perhaps it was simply that night makes certain things impossible to ignore. The small dark line between the door and its frame would catch her eye whenever she passed. The room beyond remained unlit, still, waiting. It held itself differently from the rest of the apartment, like a sentence never finished. Lena had lived there for almost 11 months, and in all that time, she had never fully opened the door. The room was supposed to have been an office. That was what the landlord had said while handing over the keys, speaking with the careful impatience of men who have already moved on to the next task. Storage room, office, whatever you like, he had told her. Previous tenant kept it shut all the time. Nothing wrong with it, just old hinges. Lena had nodded as if she cared. At the time, she had been too exhausted from moving boxes and making decisions to think about spare rooms. She had rented the apartment because it was quiet, affordable, and close enough to work that she could walk when the buses were late. The extra room felt unnecessary, a luxury almost. She told herself she would set up a desk there eventually, or shelves, or plants. Instead, she moved in, arranged her life around the rooms she needed, and let the last door remain where it was. Not closed, not open, simply unchosen. It suited her more than she liked to admit. Lena had become good at living among unchosen things. She worked in a small restoration office attached to the city museum, where her days were spent cataloging old photographs, letters, and fragments of paper that had survived floods, fires, neglect, and the ordinary erosion of time. She liked the work because it required patience and rewarded quiet attention. Torn edges could be matched, ink could be deciphered. Damaged histories could be held carefully enough that some part of them remained. It was strange, perhaps, that someone who spent all day preserving the past had built her own life around not looking at it. But people are often less consistent than their routines suggest. Lena's evenings were precise. Tea at 8:30, a shower before 10. No music after 10:30. Lights low by 11. She did not invite people over. She did not stay out late. She did not linger on old messages or open drawers she did not need to open. She told herself this was peace. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it was only control wearing softer clothes. The first time she noticed the door properly was during a thunderstorm. Rain struck the windows in restless waves, and the power in the building flickered once, then steadied. Lena stood in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, and looked down the hallway toward the small, dark gap. The door had moved. Only a little, but she was certain it had opened farther than before. She set the mug down. The apartment was silent except for rain and the occasional low murmur of pipes somewhere in the walls. She walked slowly toward the hallway, stopping a few feet from the door. The room beyond remained shadowed. Nothing frightening lived in that darkness. That was not what unsettled her. What unsettled her was the sudden and unreasonable feeling that the room had been waiting for her to notice it. Lena stood there for a long time, listening to the storm. Then she reached out and pushed the door closed. Not firmly, not all the way, just enough to narrow the gap until it looked familiar again. She returned to the kitchen, poured her tea, and did not mention the moment to herself in any language she could hear. After that, she began seeing the door everywhere. In the mirror while brushing her teeth. In the far edge of her vision while crossing the hallway. In the silence just before sleep. It was ridiculous, she knew that. It was a spare room, not an omen. A door with old hinges and an uneven frame. Nothing more. Still, every morning she checked whether it had shifted. Every evening she noticed whether the line of darkness had widened. She never found it fully closed. No matter how carefully she pushed it, by nightfall it had always returned to that same slight opening, like a thought unwilling to be put away. At work, she became distracted. While repairing a box of letters from the 1940s, she found herself staring too long at one folded envelope because it had never been sealed. The flap remained lifted, as though the sender had intended to add one more sentence and never did. Her colleague Mira noticed. "You've been somewhere else all week," she said one afternoon without looking up from her desk. "Is everything all right?" Lena adjusted the corners of a photograph that did not need adjusting. "Yes," Mira gave a small, knowing hum. That answer usually means no. Lena almost smiled. "I'm fine," she said. This answer was cleaner, better practiced. Mira did not press. That was one of the reasons Lena liked her. There had been another door once. Years earlier, in the house where Lena grew up. It was her mother's studio door, painted white, always slightly open. Her mother made dresses there. Careful work, all pins and chalk lines and quiet concentration. As a child, Lena had loved watching from the hallway, while fabric moved under lamplight like water made obedient. Her mother rarely closed the door all the way. "Rooms should be able to breathe," she used to say. Lena had believed her. Then illness entered the house in the subtle way these things often do. Not as drama, but as appointments, fatigue, half-finished meals, new medication bottles lined up like strangers in the kitchen. The studio door remained slightly open, even on the days her mother no longer worked there. Through the gap, Lena could see the chair, the abandoned tape measure, the dress form waiting with impossible patience. After the funeral, her father shut the door for the first time. Not gently, not cruelly, just completely. And somehow that was worse. Lena had stood in the hallway staring at the white surface, understanding in a child's wordless way that there are closures which do not comfort. They only make absence harder. Years later, when her father sold the house, Lena asked for nothing except a small wooden box from the studio desk. He gave it to her without asking why. She never opened it. It moved with her from apartment to apartment, placed always as the back of a closet, carrying whatever it carried in perfect silence. On a Tuesday in late October, Lena came home to find the hallway colder than the rest of the apartment. She stopped halfway down it. The door was open wider than she had ever seen it. Perhaps 6 inches now, enough that she could make out the pale shape of a window frame inside, the edge of an empty wall, the faint outline of a chair she did not remember placing there. The chair unsettled her most. Had it always been inside? She honestly could not say. Lena put her bag down beside the kitchen counter and stood listening. There was no sound beyond the ordinary old building hush. No movement, no threat. Only the room, holding its breath inside the narrow dark. She knew what any reasonable person would do. Turn on the hallway light, open the door, look inside. Confirm that the room was exactly what spare rooms always are. Dust, forgotten corners, old air. Instead, she made tea, then dinner, then washed the plate too carefully. By the time night settled fully into the apartment, she was exhausted by avoidance and no closer to comfort. At 11:40, she stood in the hallway in her socks and opened the door. The room was smaller than she expected. That was her first thought. The second was that it did not feel abandoned. Moonlight entered through a narrow window and lay across the floorboards in a pale rectangle. Dust moved through it slowly, with no urgency at all. The walls were bare, except for a row of faint marks where shelves had once hung. In the corner stood a chair, old wood, simple shape, one leg slightly shorter than the others. And against the far wall, beneath the window, sat a box, a small wooden box. Lena felt something inside her go very still. She knew that box. Not this exact one, perhaps. But no, that was not true either. She knew the scratch near the lid, the tiny brass hinge on the left side that had always darkened first, the worn corner where her mother's thumb used to rest when opening it. She crossed the room without meaning to. Her own box. The one from the closet. The one she had never opened. It was sitting beneath the window, as if it had always belonged there. Lena turned around sharply, back toward the hallway. The closet door stood shut. The apartment behind her remained silent. Nothing had changed except everything she had refused to look at. Slowly, she knelt beside the box and touched the lid. The wood was cool, real. She did not remember bringing it into the room. She did not remember ever taking it out of the closet after the move. For several seconds, she remained still, hand resting on the lid, while memory gathered itself around her like evening fog. Then she opened it. Inside were sewing needles wrapped in cloth, a measuring tape, 3 pearl buttons, a folded note, and beneath those, a photograph Lena had not seen in 15 years. Her mother sat in the studio chair by the window, looking away from the camera as though someone had just said something that amused her. Light caught one side of her face. The studio door stood slightly open behind her. Lena let out a breath that was almost a sound. The note was in her mother's handwriting. Smaller than Lena remembered, more hurried. She unfolded it carefully. "For the days when you are ready to open what hurts," it read. "Do not worry if it takes a long time. Some doors are kind enough to wait." Lena read it twice, then once more. And because grief is never only sorrow, because it can also be recognition arriving years late, she laughed through the first tears before she understood she was crying at all. She sat on the floor beneath the window for a long time, the photograph in one hand, the note in the other. The room did not ask anything of her. It simply remained. After that night, the door stayed open, not wide, not dramatically, just honestly. Lena moved the chair closer to the window. She dusted the floor. She brought in a lamp, then a small rug, then one of the museum's discarded archive tables she had been meaning to repair. She placed the wooden box on it, no longer hidden, no longer banished to the closet like a dangerous object. She did not transform the room quickly. That would have felt like another version of avoidance, making the space useful before allowing it to be felt. Instead, she visited it in the evenings. Sometimes she sat in the chair and read. Sometimes she said nothing at all. Once she brought in one of her mother's old patterns and laid it flat on the desk just to look at the curves and measurements, the delicate pencil marks of a hand that no longer existed except in traces. At work, Mira noticed the change before Lena mentioned it. "You look tired," she said one morning. Lena smiled faintly. "I am. But not in the same way." "No," Lena admitted. "Not in the same way." Mira leaned back in her chair. "Did you finally open something?" Lena looked down at the photograph she had slipped into her notebook that morning. "Yes," she said. "A room." Mira nodded as if that made perfect sense. Perhaps in the quiet economy of real friendship, it did. Winter arrived softly that year. Cold gathered at the windows. The hallway carried evening shadows earlier than before. But the apartment no longer felt divided into safe and unsafe spaces. The room at the end of the hall had become part of the home, not because it had changed, but because Lena had. One night, while sitting by the window in the once unopened room, she realized the old ache she associated with her mother had altered. It had not disappeared. Loss rarely grants that kind of mercy. But it had shifted from something sealed and airless into something that could be held. There is a difference between grief shut behind a door and grief invited into a chair by the window. One suffocates, the other listens. Lena thought then of all the years she had spent believing healing meant closing things cleanly, finishing, sealing, making the past stop entering the present. But perhaps some things are meant to remain slightly open, not as wounds, as passages, as reminders that love does not vanish simply because the room it lived in has changed. She looked toward the hallway, where the door now rested open enough for warm light to spill across the floorboards beyond it. Then she returned to the note in her lap and read the line once more. Some doors are kind enough to wait. Outside, the city moved quietly through its winter night. Pipes murmured in the walls. Somewhere downstairs, a radio played softly enough to become almost part of the building's breathing. Lena sat by the window and let the room be what it had always been asking to become. Not storage, not mystery. A place where memory could remain without ruling the house. And when she finally rose to go to bed, she did not close the door behind her. She left it slightly open. Exactly enough.